Some alarming news out of Japan that Tokyo's tap water now is not considered safe for infants. And this is a concern because they mix it with baby formula to feed their babies. The spread of radiation has led the FDA now also to bar imports of certain foods that are produced in areas near the crippled Fukushima Daiichi nuclear facility. Dr. Sanjay Gupta is live at the CNN Center for us this morning. So I found this interesting. First, they say the tap water is not to be consumed by babies. Second, they say, but by the way, please don't make a run on bottled water. I mean, what are people supposed to do in Japan?
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously kind of conflicting messages for the people that live there. We're talking about a very big city center areas here in Tokyo, so they're clearly going to need to get more supplies into that area. I think they're trying to keep people calm in the immediate aftermath of this. But I think this is another example, Karen, of what we've been talking about for some time, getting messages a little bit late, and as a result, some of the planning has not been done. We've been hearing about these spikes specifically of what's known as radioactive iodine, I-131, in the water almost since this happened. I was reporting about this about a week ago, and now they're going back, measuring this and saying, look, it is elevated, it has stayed elevated, and that number is twice the legal limit for infants. The number, in case you're curious, is 210 specific units. The legal limit for infants is 100. For adults, it's 300, so it's still below that. So they're saying for adults, they don't need to be making a run on bottled water. If infants are using water for example, to make their baby food or mix up their baby food, they should not be using tap water. They have to use some other source. But they're obviously, Karen, to your point, they're going to have to get more supplies of bottled water in this. And even if the levels come down, my guess is, having been there and seen the reaction to this, even if the levels come down, people are still going to want to drink bottled water for some time to come. It's the anxiety is not going to go away overnight.
Sanjay, when we talk about those potassium iodide pills too, you know, they talk about how it's so important for children, teens. When you talk about children are more susceptible to radiation.
That's right, and specifically this type, this iodine, the concern is your thyroid gland. It essentially uses the iodine to conduct its making of the hormones. In children, that gland is still developing, so it takes up whatever iodine's available more readily. And if radioactive iodine is more readily available, that's what it's going to take up. That's the concern.
All right, what does this mean for U.S. food? The FDA has said from these 4 prefectures that are affected close to the plant, they're not importing food. But now that we know that the water in Tokyo, which is 150 miles away, is contaminated, should there be any degree of concern on the part of American consumers?
Well, you know, it's interesting, Ali, because you could almost draw a line against the way this has been handled. First of all, the first message we got was, look, don't worry about this. We already screen food for radiation. That was the first message. But then it came out, but we don't screen all the food. Then they said, well, you know what, we're going to screen all the food that's coming from Japan for radiation. And by the way, it only makes up 4% of our imports anyways. And now we're hearing the message that you're alluding to, which is that we're just going to ban imports of many of these types of foods, including milk, including a lot of produce, including some vegetables and fruits in the foreseeable future. So it made up a small portion. That food should not be allowed to get into the United States now, even at these low radiation levels. You know, there should not be a concern. That food is banned for the time being. The big question, I think, Alan, the thing we're going to keep our eye on is how long does that ban continue? The half-life of radioactive iodine that's just sort of sitting around is about 8 days. But if it gets into the soil, if it gets into the groundwater, if it starts to accumulate its activity over there, it can be decades before the activity of those radioactive particles are gone. So how long is that food going to be considered contaminated? Will produce come out of the Fukushima region or other regions for some time to come?
Okay, so just quick answer then. If something is irradiated, if milk or spinach is irradiated, it has a half-life, meaning at some point it's going to be not irradiated before it spoils?
Well, with spinach, if it's just the particles are just sitting on the leaves, it's about 8 days. If it gets into the stems, into the root supply, it can be much longer. With milk, as you remember, Ali, it's a little bit of a different process. Grass, for example, becomes contaminated. Cows eat that, and then the iodine is sort of concentrated in their milk. So that process can take longer than 8 days. But just the particles that are sitting around, falling to the earth, getting on the leaves, about 8 days for that.